Two-Face here, back with another reaction video. This time reacting to WTF Destroy Cuba or Don't, the Cuban Missile Crisis Day 4 by Time Goes History. So now that I'm back on track starting to react to these in the proper order, it's a great Time Goes History. I've watched a few of their other videos that are not based on the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it's another good history channel which I would recommend check out, and most of the shows in there are the videos I've seen and the ones I react to brilliantly presented by Indy Nidell. So the usual disclaimer when I react to anything historical, if I don't give so much of a proper reaction, it's probably because it's obvious I don't know much on the subject. I will try and put my own input if I know anything, or I might ask curious questions which hopefully might be answered in the comments below. So anyway, the link to the original video will be in the description down below. Please go and subscribe to Time Goes History and check out all the other historical content. So without further ado, let's get this up and let's see what's in this episode.
Linguist and thinker Dr. Samuel Johnson.
Oh, I should have said at the beginning also, if you haven't seen my reaction to the other episodes of this series about the Cuban Missile Crisis, be sure to check them out before checking this one out.
And once said, patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel, as a warning to not seek simple solutions to complex problems. Science fiction author Isaac Asimov later paraphrased it as, violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. Today, on the 19th of October 1962, American President John F. Kennedy receives...
with what's going on in the world right now, that's very true.
Very competent advice as to why violence should be the simplest and most patriotic response to the Cuban Missile Crisis.
I might have said this in other episodes, but can the US really justify if they have the power or not is irrelevant, but can they really justify wiping an entire country off the map just for sake of paranoia? I think that's the most confusing part, because I probably I am most likely wrong of asking such a question, but I don't know really if the US or any country can justify wiping an entire country off the map. But as I said, I'm most likely wrong.
This is Time Ghost with the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'm Indy Nidell. Yesterday, Kennedy leaned towards not going to war with Cuba, but declaring a blockade instead. And Defense Secretary Robert McNamara had seemed to get some support from the military for that idea. Today, the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the U.S. Armed Forces try hard to sway Kennedy back to the path of military action. On Cuba, there were many more Soviets than U.S. intelligence presumes, and they are hard at work readying their missiles for deployment. The CIA has been trying to work out where the Soviet nuclear warheads were stored. Obviously, knowing this is the prerequisite for the U.S. Air Force taking them out with targeted strikes, and would significantly increase the appeal of a limited airstrike as a solution.
Wow.
One location they have been observing for months is a bunker complex near Bejucal, about a 45-minute drive south of Havana. But they have by now discarded this as a possible option, since they didn't see any recent improvements to the facility, it wasn't very well guarded, and was in fact only protected by a chain-link fence.
Wow.
Bejucal surrounds a small township founded in 1831. Other than being the terminal station of Cuba's first railroad, and hosting a very popular carnival festival, it's a fairly insignificant place. On a
Okay.
random side note, actor Andy Garcia was born there 6 years before the crisis, but he and his
Wow.
family fled to the U.S. last year. Anyhow, the CIA are very much mistaken. This is where the warheads are in fact stored. In a modified hillside bunker complex, there are now 160 nuclear warheads being prepared.
I mean, I'm not. As I said, I'm not very clued up on the history of Cuba. Only apart from the fact that it was a former Spanish colony. You know, hence why the official language of Cuba is Spanish. But how what was the regime? I'm not sure if I can ask this question correctly, but I'll give it a go. But like, how bad did a lot of Cubans find the regime for them to flee Cuba? Like, as I said, I wasn't sure how to ask this because, like, you know, I hear, like, you know, the exaggerations in TV shows and movies, like, you know, like Cubans like fleeing to the US, like in like as if that to say like they're fleeing in droves, like in large numbers. So, I mean, what was the regime in Cuba like at the time? I hope someone can answer that in the comments below, because as I said, I wasn't really sure how to ask this question, because as I said, it's just the over exaggeration, you know, of Cubans fleeing to the US and whatnot in droves, which is most likely an over exaggeration on the media part, but I could be wrong. Sorry, that was probably off topic.
To be mounted on missiles and armed.
Okay.
A veteran of the Soviet nuclear armed forces, Colonel Sergei Romanov, is in charge of the operation. The working conditions are abysmal. In Cuba, the warm and humid tropical climate makes it difficult to maintain...
Oh, stop it. Sorry. I take it when I heard Romanov, he's no way related to the former Tsar.
The right conditions for what is a very sensitive and a very dangerous job. Romanov scrounges whatever air conditioners his Cuban hosts can lay their hands on, but finally resorts to requisitioning loads and loads of ice to cool the inside of the bunker.
Okay.
Much worse, though, is the imperceptible radiation. Many of the workers will develop cancer and die from this radioactive exposure over the coming months and years. There's also the stress of maybe being discovered and bombed by the United States. There is hardly any time or any peace of mind to sleep. Strain is already taking its toll on Romanov's health, and he will die of a heart attack shortly after returning to the Soviet Union. His second in command, Major Boris Boltenko, also a nuclear force veteran, is even now suffering from undiagnosed brain cancer from prolonged exposure, and will...
I think that's never taken into consideration, is the stress on the commanding officers or people in charge of the projects, or however you want to say it, like is the stress, because I can imagine it must be paranoid, because you got CIA spy planes possibly overhead somewhere, and the possibility that it could be targeted by the US. So, and as Indy said, that loads of the workers will most likely be exposed to high levels of radiation if something went wrong. So it's well, I can imagine it's so harsh. I can't really imagine it, but I can guess that the amount of stress that these Russian soldiers and these Russian soldiers went through
will also die in a few months. Today, they are finally getting rid of at least some of the warheads.
Okay.
The first batch of the gadgets, as they call them, is ready to be shipped to the missile sites. The chosen destination is a remote missile location at the center of the island. Unit Commander Colonel Sidorov has made progress there far more quickly than expected with preparing the rockets. His unit is also the best concealed and most difficult to strike from the air.
Okay.
The warheads are loaded onto a convoy of 20 trucks that will travel 14 hours by night on primitive jungle roads. To avoid detection, they use no headlights, and only every fourth truck uses side lights to allow the convoy to stay on the road.
Okay.
Sidorov finalizes preparations so that the first warheads can be mounted already tomorrow. The Soviets will then only need a 30-minute window to arm and launch the missiles.
Wow.
In the White House, the assumption, or should I say the hope, is that this window is 18 hours, which would allow the U.S. to act without the danger of immediate nuclear retaliation. Though as of today, the U.S. does correctly assume the total Cuban nuclear arsenal, including ICBMs, will be deployable sometime in the next 2 months.
Wow.
At 9:45 a.m., President Kennedy receives the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They still want to convince him to make a military strike, as I said before. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Taylor, says,
from the outset, I would say that we felt we were united on the military requirement here. We could not accept Cuba as a missile base. That we should either eliminate or neutralize the missiles there and prevent any others coming in. So from the military point of view, that meant three things. First, attack with the benefit of surprise, those known missiles and offensive weapons that we knew about. Secondly, continued surveillance then to see what the effect would be. And third, a blockade to prevent the others from coming in. I would say, again, from the military point of view, that seems clear we were united on that.
he goes on to say that they are not unanimous regarding invasion and what political action to also take in parallel. Kennedy replies,
Let me just say a little first about the problem is, from my point of view. First, I think we ought to think of why the Russians did this. Well, actually, it was rather dangerous and rather useful play of theirs. We do nothing. They have a missile base there with all the pressure that brings to bear in the United States, damage to our prestige. We attack Cuba, missiles or Cuba, in a way that keep them clear.
Catch 22.
As they were able to do Hungary under the Anglo war in Egypt. We will have been regarded as the British reputation about Cuba anyway would be regarded as the trigger happy Americans who lost Berlin. We were the most support among our allies.
Kennedy goes on to weigh the options at hand, explaining why he might prefer a blockade, but he also says,
On the other hand, we got to do something because if we do nothing, we're going to have a problem in Berlin anyway. It's very clear last night. We're going to have this thing stuck right back up in about 2 months. And so we got to do something now.
he then outlines all the difficulties that they're presented with on a diplomatic level if they should attack Cuba, especially regarding Berlin. Then Taylor says,
We recognize all these things, Mr. President, but I think we'd all be unanimous in saying that really our strength in Berlin, our strength any place in the world, is the credibility of our response under certain conditions. And if we don't respond here in Cuba, we think the credibility of our response in Berlin is right. So that's why we got to respond. Now the question is, when we find respond.
General Curtis LeMay, Chief of the U.S. Air Force, shares his views.
Well, I certainly agree with everything General Taylor has said. And emphasize a little strongly, perhaps, that we don't have any choice except for military action.
Wow.
If we do this blockade that's proposed and political action, the first thing that's going to happen is the missiles are going to disappear into the fluids, particularly your mobile ones.
Admiral George Anderson, Chief of Naval Operations, explains that he could carry out the blockade, and it would be easier to enforce complete blockade than partial, but
If we institute a complete blockade, we are immediately having a confrontation with the Soviet Union because it's the Soviet block ships which are taking the material to Cuba.
so he too thinks decisive preemptive military action is preferable. Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, General Earl Bus Wheeler, wants his forces to join in with boots on the ground.
Okay.
Mr. President, in my judgment, from a military point of view, the lowest risk course of action, if we're thinking of protecting the people of the United States against a possible strike on us, is to go ahead with a surprise airstrike, a blockade, and an invasion.
The conversation gets testier. LeMay says,
I think that a blockade and political
pretty sure that's the most difficult. Is like you're trying to predict like how your response would look in the face of your allies and enemies. But whether that'll be considered a weak response, I'm not entirely sure. But then again, I think President Kennedy was in a catch-22. Basically, it's very hard to I don't know how to say this really, but sorry, my brain just shut off for a second. What's new? So most of his Joint Chief of Staff, like all military leaders, prefer a preemptive strike. But as I said, I'm not sure if that'll. I'm pretty sure that a blockade is still a pretty strong response, since in World War One, Britain still was blockading Germany from the sea, even though sometimes they were attacked by German U-boats, and then Germany had a blockade of Britain using their U-boats. I think mostly it depends on what type of blockade. But yeah, I could be wrong about that. Even though Britain's blockade still held, even though it was under risk, and Britain's superiority on the seas was being challenged by German U-boats. So I very much doubt that blockades would be considered a weak response, but that's just my view on it. I could be wrong, so.
They debate how certain they can be of Soviet missiles being ready and when and how to deal with fallout against Guantanamo, the U.S. base on Cuba. The conversation moves more and more towards the practicalities of military action until finally they start looking at dates. They conclude that the military can be ready to begin a blockade and do airstrikes the day after tomorrow, so Sunday the 21st.
Wow.
To really get it right, though, they prefer Tuesday the 23rd. Then there's the question of invasion. Obviously, Taylor does not know about the tens of thousands of Soviet forces armed with tactical nuclear weapons that are awaiting them on Cuba. No matter what, the Joint Chiefs of Staff are anxious to move ahead, but Kennedy still isn't sure to even respond at all. Wheeler asks,
Dave, I clear that you addressing yourself as to whether anything can almost should be done, but that if military action is to be taken, you agree with that. My question is,
they sum up the meeting and conclude that for all eventualities, they will continue preparing the military options. Kennedy leaves for his waiting helicopter. Not knowing that they're still being recorded, the chiefs wait until they think the coast is clear and then air their frustrations about not being able to decisively move ahead. Expressing an astonishing amount of wishful thinking, they interpret the president's non-committal statements as a discreet way of telling them that they should move ahead, at least with airstrikes to take out the missiles. Even General David Schopp of the Marines, who is the only military man there opposed to an invasion, feels they have Kennedy's unspoken support for airstrikes, while acknowledging that no matter what you do in this situation, you are screwed. No matter what you do in this situation, you are screwed. In fact, Kennedy is not at all convinced of any military action, and still the preparations go ahead. As we've said earlier, when you let out the slack on the leash of the dogs of war, there's a real risk they might slip out of your hand. By the time Kennedy lands for campaign rallies in Ohio, the world has taken yet another steps towards nuclear war. I will see you tomorrow on day 5 as Kennedy tries to unring the bells that he inadvertently rung today. If you just joined us, you can see the first daily episode, day 0, right here. And if you want more great content, join our Time Ghost Army and support us at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Good night and good luck.
And that'll do it. This has been another interesting video by Time Ghost History, and yeah, it's like oh God, I've lost my train of thought now. Yeah, it does seem like no matter what action there'll be severe consequences, no matter which way they'll deal with it. Because and as Indy pointed out, they won't be aware of the tactical response by the Soviets already based in Cuba. So that's the only input I can really put in. So anyway, if you like this reaction, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you